the Radical Secular Podcast, a demand for justice, equality, and rational public policy. Subscribe at YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and all the major podcast channels. Visit our website at theradicalsecular.com for articles, insights, and our complete library of episodes. Support us on Patreon, and follow us on social media.
Welcome to the Radical Secular Podcast. I'm Drew Scott.
I'm Sean Prophet.
And I'm Christoph Defoe.
Today, we'll be continuing our discussion of the HBO series Show Me a Hero from David Simon. We started our analysis of the series back in Radical Secular episode number 58, Simon Says, where we focused on the first two episodes. And in this installment, we'll be continuing that discussion about episodes 3 and 4. But before we get to any of that, or our weekly synopsis of current events, I want to remind you, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button if you're watching us on YouTube, leave a comment or review, and most importantly, tell your friends to listen. And if you're in a position to support the show, please head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/theradicalsecular. We'd really appreciate your support, and we've started posting some fun content on there, such as after-show commentary that we usually have little discussions amongst ourselves about how we felt about the show. So if you want a little window into the behind the scenes of the show, be sure to check that out. New episodes of the show post Mondays at noon Eastern on YouTube and all the major podcast channels. We also publish new articles weekly in our journal at theradicalsecular.com. Now, let's see what everyone's got going on for shirts this week. Christoph, what are you sporting?
Sure. Today I'm rocking my one of my Vietnam shirts. It's Mac v SOG.
Yes, it has the skull in a sort of a explosion logo.
Exactly, with the green beret. And so this is all about the green berets. And I'm wearing that shirt today. I know this is sort of a around the world. That was a little interesting way to put it, because I'm actually going to South Africa, right? So this is my last show before I go to South Africa, and I'm going to be there for a couple of weeks, and I'm going for reasons that I really can't get into here. But while I'm there, and this is the silver lining, and the fun part of this is that I'm going to be going on a motorcycle trip from Johannesburg to Cape Town. And how does this tie into the shirt is because motorcycle trips for me there's always a part of a motorcycle trip that like when you're tired, you're cold, you're hot, you are uncomfortable, and you kind of have to like push yourself through it, right? And I love to listen to books when I'm riding. And some of my favorite books are these sort of war books, right? Of these people going through these really, really difficult times, and also this sort of like bravado, kind of like swinging dick kind of bravado, and sort of like or swinging vagina, that's fine too. Sort of bravado that these special forces people sort of take on. And so I was sort of motivated as I'm going into this trip, which is going to be crazy, and to don the mantle of the swinging dick, swinging boo, swinging vagina, green berets. And so that's why I'm rocking my shirt today.
Awesome. Well, that sounds like a fantastic time. I'm really jealous about the motorcycle part.
Yeah.
Awesome shirt for sure. What about you, Sean?
I'm wearing, it's pretty on the nose. This is white silence equals white consent, Black Lives Matter. And that, of course, ties into our show today. I mean, it's a good sentiment every day. There's something a little disturbing this week I wanted to mention about that, though, and that is that one of the leaders of Black Lives Matter has now jumped on board the anti-vax train. So that is really, really a shame. It's like it's just diluting the message, and I really hope that gets fixed internally, because I would hate for that to reflect on the movement.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. Well, my shirt is, I didn't really pick it for any particular reason. It was just kind of the next one in the pile, and I just like it, so I decided to keep it for the show. But it's a Red Sun Superman.
Nice.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Red Sun Superman, which for those who don't know, and the audio listeners, the shirt is basically a Superman logo with a hammer and sickle in the middle, and it's from an, I think, early mid-2000s comic series in which it's kind of a what if sort of deal where, it's a hypothetical if, Superman crash landed in Soviet Russia. instead of Kansas. So it's a really interesting book, and they made an animated movie out of it recently. It was really, really awesome. So
it's a good turnaround because, Superman is white American Jesus, basically. So
exactly, for sure.
Yeah, I got to check that out, Drew. I remember you suggested that to me a while back, and I haven't gotten to it yet. And you also suggested to show me a hero, which I now have watched, and you were right about that. That is so we're going to talk about that, but that's absolutely a fucking great show.
I'm glad you dug it, and we'll get into all that. So for now, though, I want to get to some current events. Mm-hmm. So it seems like we're all been sort of broken records here. I think all of us here on this panel are on the same page as far as vaccines, masks, and our attitude towards COVID in general. We've been yelling from the rooftops about it since this all started. But with the virus being so prevalent in our lives, both personally and in our politics, it seems absurd to not discuss what is happening in some way each week. And now it happened. We've officially passed the number of deaths in the 1918 pandemic. We did it. We're number one. We're number one. No. Okay.
I don't know to do that or to do this, right?
yeah, exactly. So considering everything that we've been talking about over the past year and a half, with vaccine refusal, mask refusal, conservatives pumping tons of misinformation out there, how do you guys think this is ever going to truly end? And will it ever truly end?
Well, okay. So we've got, 700,000 deaths, and it's not exactly an apt comparison because in 1918, the U.S. population was probably about a third the size of what it is now. But the 700,000 is obviously an undercount. And what we do know is the pace of new vaccinations is slowing down, and there's potential for new variants. So we don't really know when this is going to end. But there's something that's kind of funny, kind of, I guess, very dark, but that is the Herman Cain Award. And we've talked about this before. It's a very unfortunate name, but it had to be named after someone who downplayed COVID, who opposed masks or vaccines, and then died of COVID. And the good news, though, about this forum on Reddit is that some people have been actually reached by the award. And there's a category of people on that thread who've been redeemed, decided to get their vaccine due to actually reading this thread and seeing all the people who died. So that's excellent. And if, for that part of it, that's probably good that it's named after him. Although he didn't certainly help. But this death cult, though, surrounding COVID, it's the most cynical thing imaginable because all the power brokers in the GOP know that COVID is real. They're all, for the most part, vaccinated, and people at Fox News are vaccinated. Yep. Some of these preachers are probably vaccinated. Okay, they just don't tell anybody because the whole thing is being played also for the most cynical purposes of blaming illegal immigration, turning people against government and Democrats. It's just like they're so mad that Trump screwed up COVID and didn't get reelected, and so they're determined to make this somehow play against the Democrats by killing people. And it's a supreme and deadly grift. And I wanted to talk about one new wrinkle that just happened, and that is that we're seeing now the rise of ICU vigilantes who are trying to forcibly take and remove critically ill patients out of the hospital. And this is where this whole thing was always headed, because if you're in for a penny, which is mask refusal, then you're going to be in for a pound all the way through vaccine refusal and up to trying to break dying people out of hospitals, because people who reject experts, they always have to escalate or they're forced to face the consequences. And
exactly.
Anything's better for them, including committing a crime, than admitting that they're wrong. And admitting someone, that is that wrong means that they have to take responsibility for the deaths that they caused, and they have no way out. So in a small bit of good news on COVID, both cases and deaths seem to be on the slight decline. And we know that cases lead deaths by 2 to 3 weeks. And right now, the deaths seem to have peaked at just over 2,000 deaths a day within the past week or so. So we could possibly be on the downswing. It's too early to tell if we're going to get another variant before this is over. So that's my take.
Yeah. Christoph?
Yeah, I'm just groaning in just groanness of what the fuck, man. I mean, 2,000 people a day, you know, and people are talking about, oh, this is, you know, it's not deadly. It's not that big of a deal. It's just the flu. And it's like how, and you know, you can point people to this evidence. You can see here are the actual numbers. 2,000 people are dying every day. 700,000 people have died altogether. And it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter, I think, to these people. And I think it doesn't matter for the reasons that some of the reasons you're talking about, Sean. I saw a meme on Twitter recently. It was Ilhan Omar, I think she retweeted or whatever. And it was a Breitbart clip of some kind. And some guy in this whoever it was writing for Breitbart, said like, you know, that it was some nonsensical stuff. Like he was claiming that the left wants people on the right, anti-vaxxers and everything else to die, and that is somehow why they're encouraging them to take the vaccine. Whatever. Set aside the complete nonsensicalness of that, but one of the things that he said was really telling. He said the quiet part out loud. He said, yes, the vaccine is. He concedes that the vaccine is effective, but what he says, but he basically just said it straight up. Is like, you know, they just want us to say we were wrong. And we can't say we were wrong. Like that was the gist of what he was saying. Like I'm paraphrasing, but that was the gist. So, and that goes to what you're saying, Sean, is like the doubling down. Like it's not even about the sickness. It's not about the deaths. It's about owning the libs. It's about necessarily being right. And so, and this is so reflected in how Trump is, right? Like even in the face of obvious evidence where it's like, clearly that is a lie. That is not true. Nope. I don't know what you're talking about. It's just, and it's just like this absurd, something of bravado and honor and all this sort of like toxic masculinity that's really brought all together. So to answer your question, Drew, I really think that we're going to be living with this for a very, very, very long time. I think that this is part of our lives for the foreseeable future. That's how I'm thinking about it. And I think it'll get better. I think that the cases peaking is a great thing. I mean, well, you know what I mean. I mean, the fact that it's peaked and not going back, not continuing to go up is a good thing. But I was sitting on the toilet today, and I was saying to myself, and I was thinking to myself, as one does when one sits on the toilet, like just thinking about stuff. And I was just like, man, like when we started this out, we thought it was going to be a thing, and then we're going to get through it. But like the way I'm thinking about this has changed a lot. Like the world is now different forever, and that's it.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And you know, Sean, you know what you're saying about the Herman Cain Award. First of all, I think that's a perfect name for it.
Yeah, totally.
and second of all, you know, if there's a single bright spot in all of this madness, and I don't think there are many, but one of them is that, you know, this seems to be killing off just about every asshole, misinformation spewing right-wing radio host in the country. Like, what's that about? Are you guys seeing all these headlines of so-and-so from some radio station, right-wing conservative commentator that you've never heard of, dropped dead from COVID, who spewed COVID misinformation? Like, that's been like a recurring theme.
So true.
There's been half a dozen of them, and there's been a bunch of preachers too. But here's what it comes down to, right? If they acknowledge that this is all true and that liberals were right, then that means that they have to take responsibility for those deaths, including their own, including their families, including all that. It's very much like what happens when Second Amendment people, when their families get shot and they still don't change their mind because they're like, well, we can't admit we were wrong about this because that would mean we killed we were partially responsible for our own family member dying. And that is like the most, I mean, how do you get over that hurdle? You don't.
Yeah, it's like pulling it. It's like pulling that thread, right? Like once you pull that thread, and it's like, and this is true in terms of a lot of bad belief systems, right? This is true in terms of religion and a lot of various things, right? When you pull one little, like they can't concede anything because once you concede this, then you must concede that, and you must concede that, and then, like you say, Sean, now you have to take responsibility for some really, really shitty things and explain a lot of really, really shitty policies and programs and things that you may have done or that you have subscribed to.
Same goes for Climate is another big one like that.
There's another big one. Yep.
Yeah. So you're saying that talking snakes and virgin births and resurrections aren't real, Christoph? Is that what you're trying to say?
Look, I can neither confirm nor deny those allegations. I cannot.
Cannot possibly. Can't go there. Okay.
No.
So moving along. This week we saw the results come in from the GOP fueled recount effort in Arizona. And wouldn't you know it, drum roll, Biden won.
Who knew?
Old news to anyone who hasn't gargled gallons of Trump brand orange Kool-Aid for the last 6 years. But I found this whole thing somewhat hilarious, considering that they actually widened Biden's margin of victory there.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Although these efforts by Republicans and their shitbag in chief, Cheeto Mussolini, to dismantle democracy are generally frightening. Seeing the system hold like this is comforting. Mm-hmm. So with that said, who knows what the future holds for 2022 and 2024? We're seeing voter rights trampled all over the country, and the GOP isn't stopping its cutthroat, ruthless, anti-democratic tactics anytime soon. But in this case, the overwhelming evidence, or rather lack thereof, showed what most of us already knew to be true, that there was no overwhelming voter fraud and that Biden won. So what do you guys think these results say about the state of our democracy right now?
Well, okay. I mean, the whole thing was a circus that never should have happened.
Yeah.
That recount was disgusting. And the idea of it is disgusting because it was not the state doing it. It was a private contractor being paid by the Republican Party. And so what I have to say about it is that as long as the GOP exists as a national party, our democracy is fucked. They don't believe in democracy at all. They're not a loyal opposition party. We're not doing nearly enough to confront them. We're playing checkers and they're playing four-dimensional chess, which is hard to admit because we're supposed to be the smart party, right? In terms of power, though, they are running circles around us in every way. Mm-hmm. And there was an interesting note this week from Michael Cohen, and he said that Trump is not planning on running again in 2024, but that Trump is making more money from his election fraud narrative than anything else he's ever done in his life. You know, so it's also an open secret that all the top Republicans also know that Biden won the election. And
of course they do.
The most interesting ones to think about are those Republicans who won on the same ballots that elected Biden, right? If they question the results, they're questioning their own elections. And there are dozens of them all over the country who got elected in places where Biden won. So it's setting up an impossible schism within the GOP that has to play out. It can't last forever, though.
Yeah. I think you're right about the checkers and chess thing, although I don't even know if I see it as them being smart. I see it as like a form of cunning almost, you know, like a hawk doesn't need to be smart to, you know, snatch up a squirrel in the field, right? Like it just has that cutthroat instinct.
If you're moving the pieces in ways that defeat Democrats, then it doesn't matter what, you know, why. It doesn't matter whether you're smart or not. You're moving those pieces. You're moving the levers of power. You have access to those levers of power. You know how to move them. And that, you know, we're not competing in the way that we need to compete to defeat them, as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right. What
do you think, Christoph?
Yeah, you know, it's a good question, and I'm a very optimistic guy by nature, but I am less than optimistic about our democracy right now. And I think this really actually ties into what we were just talking about, this idea of doubling down, of digging in one's heel. So remember back in 2009 or 2008, I'm sorry, when Obama won, and there was a lot of talk about the Republicans doing some soul searching, right? And saying like, hey, look, you know, we were beat handily. Demographics are changing. It's not the same America we grew up in. Maybe we should change our message. And that was a choice that they had. And of course, we know how they responded to that choice, which was to double down, triple down. So the ideas, and so rather than come up with ideas that will appeal to a broad coalition of people, they've decided to double down on their shrinking minority and cheat. And we can't run a democracy that way. I really would love to be in a world where someone like me politically is actually more of like kind of center right. Right. That is where I think I belong on the political spectrum, on a normal political spectrum. Right. Center to center right. That's probably where I probably end up. And that is a crazy thing to say, knowing my politics versus American politics, right?
It is, because Christoph, I mean, you and me we're social democrats, but we believe in private property, right? I mean, the lefties are like fucking communists, right? They wanna,
exactly. That's what I'm talking about. Like that's left, right? That's left. Like the government owns the means of production, left, right? Like no one has private property, left. That's left. And then you got fascism over here. Like we're in the middle. We're in the fucking middle. Like sanity. Just fucking sanity. We just don't let people just die. That's when people run out of money, they just don't fucking die. That's my politics, right?
Shouldn't be a controversial position.
Exactly. But it is a controversial position in America right now. And so until the GOP gets to a place, and this is all about those power games you're talking about, until the GOP literally runs out of options. And by that, I mean they can't gerrymander anymore. Whatever, all the tricks, the filibuster is gone, let's say, all of the various things they use to stay in power, until those things are gone, I think we can be absolutely certain that our democracy is in nonstop peril until then, because they will do anything. Look, remember, if they could find a way for Trump to be in office right now that didn't involve him actually getting more votes, he would be. They wouldn't say, oh, you know what? He didn't win fair and square. Absolutely not. If they were able to overturn the election, they absolutely would have. And that is terrifying, guys.
Did you see the 6-point plan that they found this week?
Oh my God!
About what Mike Pence was supposed to do, and how they had every option like ticked right down the line. And this is what I mean by them playing chess. It's like, we don't think, nobody on the left actually thought that they would have openly written memos about subverting the Constitution, but they did.
But they did.
It's a failure of imagination on our part, I guess.
I think it is true. I think it is true, because I think that when we look at ourselves, when we look at them, we fit. I know for the most of my life as a lefty, I have thought to myself that yes, the people on the other side have we have some basic things in common. First of all, and this is one of the biggest mistake that I had, was that I assumed that we all wanted the best for society in general, right? Like that is a huge assumption. I thought maybe they have a different way of getting there. Maybe they think, blah, 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 maybe the personal responsibility and all this stuff, but ultimately they want everybody in society to prosper. That is just not true. And it's just not true. And so that was a gut punch that I learned as I got older. But I think, so it's really terrifying when you start thinking in those terms. These people are not, like, this group of conservatives are just not, they're not, I don't know, they're just not playing by democracy rules. They're just not interested in democracy.
They're modern day Confederates is what they are.
Well, that's absolutely right. And we've constantly talked to our blue in the face about the conservative moral hierarchy, but I have one other thing that we have to keep in the top of our minds, and that is the year 1850, because this is a party of the year 1850. And that is something that is, because you remember the way things were in 1850, and that is exactly the society they are trying to build or rebuild. So true.
It's absolutely right. Yeah. Feudalism.
One of the things I was thinking about, Christoph, when you were talking about where you saw yourself in the spectrum, is how, Elizabeth Warren says that she is a capitalist to her bones, right?
Right.
And so did Biden just say that?
Yeah. So as far as the whole Trump thing and where the GOP is at right now, I always describe it as a sphere of ideas, right? And we all may fall in some different places within the sphere, but we're all still within the sphere. And it's all kind of, within the bounds of reasonability, at least or so I thought, kind of like you were saying, Christoph. But this whole Trump thing and where the GOP is at, it's not just outside the sphere. It's like a couple miles down the road under a freeway bridge, smearing its feces on the wall, right? So
it is.
It really is, man.
If the American public actually knew what their plans were, I don't think they would get more than 25% support, if that.
I think that's right. I mean, even if they just said what their if they just took a paper and read their policies, their policy objectives from beginning to end, no one would vote for them. Their policies, as they stand, are not popular. Even they're not popular. That's why they have to dress it up with a bunch of boogeymen, black people, immigrants, socialism,
as well as they cloak it in hyper nationalism and their and Christianity. And
oh my God,
all
yes.
Of that. It's why the evangelicals are hand in hand with them.
It's becoming so prevalent now. Like every right-wing politician that you see on Facebook is like God, God, God.
Oh my God, always.
It's triple what it used to be. I mean, the craziness that you see in their tweets and in their posts and things like that. And I think we also forget that they did not write a 2020 platform.
At all. I know it blows my mind.
I can't think of another time when an American political party has failed to write a platform for its convention. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what happened with the Whigs and, going all the way back that far, but I don't think in the since the 20th century that any party has ever failed to write a platform. And the reason is it fits on a 3x5 card, white Christian nationalism and Trump,
Yeah, exactly. They don't actually stand for any policy at all. It is just it's just naked pursuit of power and a cult of personality around Trump. Like that's it. And Trumpism.
Yeah. Whatever the dear leader says.
Exactly.
So moving right along, this week, China outlawed Bitcoin outright, as well as other cryptocurrencies. Now, while I'm usually not quick to celebrate China flexing its authoritarian muscle, this is a situation where I think this is the right move. And for one main reason, the environment. Crypto is generally dumb, but more importantly, the insane and staggering amount of energy and electricity needed to power these silly little microtransactions is jaw-dropping and terrible for the planet in general. So with that in mind, what do you guys think about this move on the part of the Chinese government?
Well, okay. You don't really want to get me started on crypto, but I will give you a nutshell case. First, I want to say, though, I mean, what China is doing right now is really very scary because they have too much power. And I mean, I think it's good to have financial regulations, but they are just across the board doing so many crazy things that are violating people's human rights and violating, any sort of norms that we would accept anywhere else in the world. And the problem is they are becoming the gorilla on the block. And what they do is going to affect the rest of the world. It's going to affect the internet. It's going to affect entertainment. It's going to affect finance. And so, but in terms of what they did for crypto, this is good because the existence of crypto has always been a direct attack on one of the primary functions of government, which is the coinage of money. And you're certainly correct that the structure of crypto based on this proof of work and doing these extremely complex calculations that have to be done ever increasing, like as the more Bitcoins that are mined, the harder this work becomes and the longer it takes and the more energy it uses. And it's an environmental disaster. And it's also, of course, as has been said a million times, it's a magnet for organized crime and terrorism. It's becoming an extremely easy to use way of hiding assets, adding to the problem of unaccountable offshore banking, which is already a multi-trillion-dollar problem. So Bitcoin itself for investors, it's the mother of all pyramid schemes. It's basically a security without a company to back it, as I mentioned in my money episode, which everybody should watch. This is, I always say that cryptocurrency is the monetary equivalent of being famous for being famous. Right? Everybody's buying it because everybody else is buying it. And
it's true.
The SEC, thankfully, is strongly considering a crypto crackdown in the US. At a minimum, they want to regulate Bitcoin like a security. And of course, all the Bitcoin people don't like that at all because they've been operating with absolutely no regulation for years now and built whole
impunity.
Impunity. So we need to go way beyond regulating Bitcoin, though, and create our own central bank digital currency. And I've been wondering why that hasn't happened, why it happened in China, and why we just didn't do it. And it's becoming obvious now that it sets up a conflict with the banks, because if we had a transparent, publicly accountable payment system backed by the government, it's an existential threat, right? You don't need a bank account. You just send you just have your government account on your phone and you send somebody money and that's it, right? It does away with a whole big portion of the banking system. So it's direct government to consumer. And so the banks want to avoid this at all costs. And I think they're trying to figure out a way how they can keep their hands in that pie. But the price of us not doing this will be that we will lag the world on a central bank digital currency adoption. And this could really cost the US big, because remember, a big part of our advantage in this country is being able to act as the world's reserve currency. Everybody wants dollars. But if China has a central bank digital currency that starts to be accepted in more of the world, we could be in for a hard road.
Yeah. A good point, Sean, what you said there at the end, especially that sort of, I was thinking, a couple things. That one thing, and this happened in spades during the Trump era, but it's been happening incrementally over many years, and that is China being a genuine rival, but they've been a rival for a long time. But really, this idea of basically them supplanting us as like the world superpower, right? And like it's hard for them to do that, and it's hard for anyone to do that. But it's not like they're not making strides. And this, to me, seems like just another brick being taken off of that wall, perhaps, right? And so it's like a drop in that bucket, but it's an important drop in that bucket, right? And so we get to a point where China and not the United States is the world's bank, where China, but not the United States, is the world's sort of infrastructure creator, right? Like China goes to African nations and says like, hey, we'll build you this fucking dam. We'll got to take a lot of stuff out of your country, but we'll build you a dam and all this infrastructure, right? And they go ahead and they do that. And then they're spreading their sphere of influence in that way, right? China has stealth technology. That should be very, very concerning for us, right? So there's so many ways in which China is sort of taking over that role. And I think a lot of people on the left hate the United States as the world's police, but who would you prefer? That's what I'm saying. Who would you prefer to be the world's police? Either like the United States, and is it the United States, or do you want China, or do you want Russia? Right. Yeah. So and the other thing I wanted to mention too. And I'm interested to see how Biden deals with that. I mean, he went to the UN, he did his speech. It was very much sort of like a return to the classic American president in front of the UN, not Trump, obviously, but also not Obama, who was like a celebrity and everybody loved him and everyone had a lot of hope and It was sort of more of, a more traditional sort of speech, and which is fine. It'll be interesting to see how Biden deals with China. And the last thing I want to mention is just what I think we basically started this little conversation about, which is the tariff, just the authoritarian sort of flexing of China is genuinely terrifying. I mean, I just can't imagine being a Chinese citizen right now and just watching my rights just sort of fall away. And it's not like, and this is, I think, really important too. It's not like one day they just show up and everyone's rights are gone. It happens slowly over little, being chipped away, and sometimes it's a big break, but ultimately it's this slow process. And I think that is definitely the most terrifying thing. I feel really shitty for students and liberals and progressives in China who, they're going to come knock on your door and you could be disappeared just like that. And that is terrifying.
It's the way it is. It's almost like if you can imagine the Chinese government censors on social media being like Facebook, but then you get taken away to real jail. That's kind of, and also looking at what happened in Hong Kong. Okay. Hong Kong, up until just a few years ago, was a democracy where they actually had elections. Now, okay, they have to approve everybody on the ballot and only a very small number of people actually get to vote. So elections have been abolished in Hong Kong. Yeah, it's insane. It's insane. And by the way, can we talk about the fact that that is what conservatives in this country would be perfectly happy with? Right. Oh, yeah. Right. That is what right. They like a small group of people gets to vote, and the government or someone can always just veto it. Right. Like that. And so basically it's like, it is just this sort of sham election thing that we see in all kinds of countries. Russia, China, Iran. Exactly. It's everywhere. And even I'm trying to think, the Philippines. There's another great example. Manny Pacquiao is going to run for president there. And Duterte is saying, well, he might not be eligible. It's like, okay, well. Okay.
Yikes. But yeah, I think you're right. The authoritarian nature of it can't be overstated. It's just I'm not a fan of this whole crypto thing. In addition to the toll on the environment, I just straight up don't like how it turns everyone who's into it into a goddamn snake oil salesman.
Absolutely.
It really does.
Like everyone who gets into it is constantly pushing it. And I'm just like, shut the fuck up already.
It's so true. And I get these like messages, like on Instagram or Facebook, like, or this happens a lot on Facebook. I'll get like a DM from some random ass person that I don't know. Oh, cryptocurrency. I'm just like, oh my God.
No.
Yeah.
They just want you to buy it so they can make money. And one last thing about it is that El Salvador is trying to adopt it as their national currency. It's going to be a disaster.
Wow,
it's going to be a
deflationary
disaster. And the people are upset. The people are protesting in the streets about it.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't blame them.
Me neither.
Well, moving right along. So getting closer to our main topic, in a coincidental correlation, there were actually a couple of David Simon-related news stories that developed since our previous discussion about Show Me a Hero. The first was David Simon himself making some headlines in Texas. So in our last discussion, I mentioned that in addition to making great series, Mr. Simon is a take-no-bullshit liberal, and I liked him a whole lot as a person in addition to being a fan of his work. He managed to prove my assertions to be justified this week when he halted production of his newest in-development series in Texas due to the state's new draconian anti-abortion legislation / Handmaid's Tale impression. He had this to say on Twitter, quote, if an employer, this is beyond politics. I'm turning in scripts next month on an HBO nonfiction miniseries based on events in Texas. But I can't and won't ask female cast / crew to forego civil liberties to film there. What else looks like Dallas / Fort Worth? End quote. Fantastic. So you can see why I like this guy. Now, I don't know what this new series is, but I bet it's going to be fantastic. Whatever it is, I'll be there night one when it premieres. But with that said, what do you guys think about Simon's move here? Christoph?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I think that for the same reason why it's great when basketball teams decide not to hold. I think they didn't hold the All-Star thing in North Carolina over the bathroom bills, right? So, and I may be screwing that up, but you guys get the point. I think that flexing corporate or private power in a world where we are deliberately constrained as a people to flex our collective muscle publicly because the people who represent our politicians don't represent the country. They represent a very distorted view of the country. So if there's a way that our values can be impressed or stood up for in the private sector, and there's people who are prepared to do that, I think that's great. And by the way, I think Simon in general, he's great. We're going to talk about his show, but his content is really just outstanding. And like I said, I mean, ideally, we wouldn't be in a situation where this is like one of our last best option. But if we are, then I'm glad that he's doing it.
Yeah, and I certainly champion Simon's efforts, and I agree with everything Christoph just said. But I think the problem here is that this is now become a critical path on the right-wing agenda, and this whole abortion 6-week lawsuit vigilante program is spreading to about a dozen states, and we're not going to hold back this tide. If these draconian laws are going to be stopped, it's going to have to be at the Supreme Court. And if the Supreme Court guts the right to abortion, we'll see it become illegal in about half the states. And the next step the right has planned is going after women who leave states to seek abortion care. I guarantee you that within a couple of years after getting this done, then they'll start cracking down on travel. And they won't stop until abortion is banned everywhere, because as long as there's an escape hatch, then they don't have control of women. So they're going to ultimately be pushing for a ban at the federal level. And we'll see how far the Supreme Court's going to go. They may cooperate with that. It's hard to say. But you can also expect proposals coming from these states for very heavy penalties for anyone who sells the abortion pill into those states where it's illegal. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point they seek to impose the death penalty on someone, because they haven't been able to stop the flow of drugs, and abortion pills are just drugs. So, those drugs will get into those states. And I can imagine them being very upset about that, because having those drugs available could make these abortion bans somewhat irrelevant, right? Because if you can just take a pill, yeah, sure, it's a drag if you don't get aftercare, but at least women aren't going to be going to back alleys. So,
right.
But I think we're thinking too small about this a little bit, because the ultimate goal of the right is nothing less than complete control over a woman's fertility. And I would expect them ultimately to be working towards some sort of biometric solution to actually monitor women's cycles remotely. And that sounds very dystopian, but your iPhone can you can have a heart monitor, right? They could make women wear a monitor to somehow monitor their cycles. And this totalistic mindset that I'm talking about, we don't think this way, and we need to think this way more, because they are already planning years in advance with this stuff. And I could promise you that in some Christian right think tank, these plans have already been drawn up.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sean. And I agree that, it comes down to the Supreme Court, really. And I think that's one of the main reasons that got people like us were shouting our heads off in 2016 about how important it was to support Hillary Clinton. Whatever you may have thought of her personally, or whether you liked her personality, the Supreme Court was at stake, and America shit the bed. So good job on that one, guys. Not you guys, but
It couldn't have been more important. It was the most important election of our lifetimes, and we fucked it up. So
yeah,
that is for sure.
Yeah, for sure. But so the other piece of David Simon adjacent news in the time between our last Show Me a Hero discussion and this one was, of course, the tragic passing of Michael K. Williams, who came to fame playing Omar Little on the David Simon series The Wire. I wanted to mention this not just because he was a fantastic actor, and not just in The Wire, but also The Night of and Lovecraft Country, which just wrapped up. But also because the way he died highlights the issue of opiate addiction and overdose, as well as how those statistics are worsening for people of color in particular, according to a new study by the National Institutes of Health, published in the American Journal of Public Health. Non-Hispanic Black individuals in 4 U.S. states experienced a 38% increase in the rate of opioid overdose deaths from 2018 to 2019, while the rates for other race and ethnicity groups held steady or decreased. Personally, I don't really judge people that self-medicate. The world is a really fucked up place, and until you solve the complications and hurt of the human condition, which I don't think anyone is likely to really do anytime soon, I don't think the issue. I don't think the issue of people self-medicating is going anywhere, whether it be with booze or fentanyl. But it's still infuriating to see people, good people and talented people, lost like this. Williams' former co-star on The Wire, Clark Peters, who also appears in Show Me a Hero in some of these later episodes, stirred a bit of controversy with his comments about his friend and former co-star's death. He said on Twitter, quote, "I'm conflicted over Michael K. Williams' death. Pissed off that he let us down, angry because he could have reached out and didn't, instead led us to believe he was all right. Sorry that another brother's life has been wasted. We can do better than this. Talk to a brother." End quote. Now, some thought he was too harsh. This was right after he died. But personally, I thought his remarks were warranted. What do you guys think about his comments and this crisis in general?
Well, I think that in terms of what this guy said, he's expressing himself as he's going through a difficult time. I think that I don't know that I necessarily agree with the sentiment that he's expressing, but I get, wanting to express yourself under those circumstances. In general, right? So I'm using myself as an example. I mean, I spend my entire life basically trying to manage my mood, right? Like, I don't know whether it's capitalism, it is the world, it is, like you say, the human condition. If it is, or it's just my personal experience growing up and whatever that was, being black, whatever, any kind of thing you throw into the pot that makes it such that, like, managing my mood is a full-time job. And I say this to people all the time. I use all kinds of things to do that, ranging from meditation to therapy to booze to pot, right? Like, so it's like, and I don't, so the self-medicating thing, I have zero problem with that. And I think the larger problem is how we as a society deal with drugs and with drug addicts, and how we talk about them, how we marginalize people, and how we refuse to see how trauma, early childhood trauma, leads to these things. And by the way, we can get into the whole question of, we can get into the sort of free will conversation here also, right? We are definitely a product of our genetics and our environment and all that kind of stuff. And so how much of what the drug addict does or thinks or feels is their fault, and where do you even find that fault? And so there is that element. And then the biggest thing, and again, the biggest thing is how, like, to talk about the way we deal with treatment, the abject failure of how we deal with treatment for substance abuse. So, like, as I'm thinking about this, I think of him as Omar's death. I think immediately of all of that stuff, man. Like, and I am saddened by it. It makes me shake my head. But the bottom line is if this guy had access to good, clean drugs, he'd probably be alive.
Yeah. And this is okay. I have a real problem with Clark Peters' tweet, and this is why. All right. Because the tweet was written as if this person committed suicide. Like, oh, why didn't you reach out? We would have been there for you. No, this is a problem of dosage. Okay. And by the way, I want to preface these remarks by also saying that I completely agree, Christoph. I have zero judgment for anyone who self-medicates. Your mental state is your own problem. Okay. Right. And as long as it doesn't affect someone else, like if you're not doing it while you're driving or operating heavy machinery or taking care of children or, other things like that. But I've always advocated for legalizing all drugs and making them available in known dosages at cheap prices, including opiates. And obviously in an ideal world, people don't get addicted to opiates. That's not a healthy thing. Okay. But we don't live in that world. And even a few weeks on painkillers could be enough to cause someone to seek out more pills after they get out of the hospital. Happens to people at all levels of society. And once they start buying pills on the street, they find out that street heroin is cheaper and easier to get. So, don't get me started on the subject of how so many people got access to pills, though. There's a documentary called The Crime of the Century from Alex Gibney about the Sackler family, who basically waged drug warfare on millions of Americans and made billions of dollars. And these people haven't still been sufficiently punished. So, getting back to this death, though, almost all street heroin contains fentanyl. And the culprit in these overdoses is fentanyl. And we've never had these kinds of overdoses before the current wave of fentanyl. It's super strong. You can get a lethal dose just by handling it in uncut form. Okay.
Insane.
It's insanely, like, micrograms can kill you. So I know personally people who've clinically died multiple times and were only revived because someone was around to give them Narcan. Now, this is a 50-something-year-old guy who's a successful actor. He's not going to intentionally kill himself. And but if he might have taken some heroin that he didn't know what the concentration was. He didn't know what the dosage should have been. So having fentanyl-laced heroin around in a world of addicts is the drug equivalent of having a semi-automatic weapon, right? Loaded semi-automatic weapon. And having it on the street guarantees more death. And Michael K. Williams died like almost every addict dies because he didn't know the dosage. And this is why drug legalization is so important. We need people to be able to self-medicate safely to prevent these kind of tragedies.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that for the most part. I think more the part that I felt was warranted in Peter's statement was just the frustration of just, not being able to help his friend when he was clearly hurting. I mean, we're not talking about like pot or, beer or meditation. We're talking about hardcore opiates. You definitely need to have some stuff going on to go to that level. I think to fentanyl and things like that.
5-10, but you don't know how much is in there. They cut heroin with fentanyl, and so they can cut it way more. And 5-10 years ago, he'd be alive today. I mean, Heath Ledger probably died the same way. I mean, there's so many celebrities that have died like this, and it's dosage, man. I mean, that's I agree.
Yeah, I agree. So now for our main topic, our second part of 3 installments discussing the series Show Me a Hero. So if you haven't seen the series, check it out on HBO. If you didn't see our first discussion, definitely check that out as well. From this point on, heavy spoilers for this series will be discussed. So if you want to experience it for yourself and be caught up with the discussion, go hit pause, go check out the show, go check out our first installment, come back. We'll be right here. So this is your spoiler warning. So with that said, and that out of the way, Christoph, you were off during our first discussion about this series. So I'd love to get your thoughts on those first 2 episodes with Nick Wasicsko's rise, those vicious city council meetings, and the white rage we saw on display in those first 2 episodes. And just what have you thought of the series so far in general?
Sure. I'm glad to be here to talk about this time around. It really is a great series. From the outset, I hadn't seen the show The Wire in a long time, and so as I'm watching the show, I was like, man, the sort of cadence of this show, the way that it rolls, is very familiar. And I was like, oh, right, that's because it's the same guy, and like really, you feel that. The way that they flip from story to story to story within, and the seamlessness with which they do it, and the different sort of angles of the issue that they come at it with, is very, very reminiscent of The Wire, and it's really, really, really good. The first 2 episodes, I really enjoyed. I enjoyed the show in general. I think that the biggest thing is, like you said, is the white rage. And it is just, this is Trumpism, right? Like, you see it, it's like almost verbatim the same stuff. It's like the chanting and it's not, and like that real rage with the spittle flying out, right? And that level of anger, and this sense that this idea that this grievance that, like, oh my God, we're being screwed over by those elites, right? That judge, right? And then also I thought that was really interesting that I saw throughout these episodes, but in the first 2 episodes as well, is the extent to which these white people, in this show, the Yonkers residents or whatever, go to convince themselves that this has nothing to do with race, right? Like they, and it's like they say this kind of stuff over and over again. No one runs around saying the N-word. Even in this, in the most recent episodes that I watched, they don't say the N-word anymore. They don't say this and this and that, but it has everything to do with race. And he really puts a fine point on that. Another element that I thought was really interesting is some of the folks go and meet some of the black folks, the white folks from Yonkers. They go into their house and they take tea with them and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, it just reminds me of how growing up in the suburbs myself, how, we didn't know people who lived in that environment, and our assumptions about them were just based on stereotypes. I think they were based on ignorance. They were based on the news, and it really sort of made it such that like the worst elements of those environments end up being the standard bearer in everyone's mind for those environments. So I think they really captured it really well. Really, so a really outstanding thing. The white rage in particular, and the looks on the faces when they get off the bus and the women are standing there. That look on their face that could have been out of the 1950s, like sit-ins when they were dumping the food on their heads. It was like that same snarling face. So it was a little bit disturbing, but also really, really good.
Yeah, I'm glad you got something out of it. I knew that there would be, plenty of substance for us to chew on with this series. So we talked a lot about the housing issues explored in this series. And while that is obviously a major part of it, I wanted to get a bit more into the characters and some of the interpersonal and social issues explored in these 2 episodes as we get a bit more character development in them. For example, we start to see the effect that Nick's stance on the housing is taking on his political capital and his career. We see him force the housing issue through by showing the council members the consequences of their holdouts in the form of layoffs for the city, which to me is the ultimate form of NIMBYism, where the problem isn't real until it's affecting them and the people that they directly know or care about. But this begins something of a downward spiral for Nick. As even he leaves the city council meeting, he and his wife are attacked in their car by an angry mob, infuriated that the housing is being built. So what did you guys think about this sequence with them fleeing for their lives after the housing is passed? And how close of a reflection of our current political climate does that portray?
I mean, it's so on the nose. These were the Trump rallies of the late 1980s, okay? And these were the Proud Boys protests of the 1980s. And these were the Charlottesville marches of the 1980s. And the funny thing is, this is made in 2014 before we had any idea that Trump was even going to run. So what that should tell you is, of course, what we all know and talk about every week is that nothing has really changed in our country. Trump himself wasn't so much of a backlash against President Obama as he was a backlash against civil rights progress in general. By the time Obama was elected, white rage against civil rights had been building for 4 decades. And I hate to sound like a broken record because I brought this up, I think, 2 or 3 times already on this show, but the book, The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee, okay? She talks about how white Americans turned against public goods rather than share them with marginalized populations.
Yes.
And of course, that always brings up the story of the Virginia schools closing for 2 years and white people hurting themselves to as long as they could hurt black people more. And so when it came to the city being bankrupt and getting this court judgment against them, of course they did it. I mean, because Americans have always been willing to bankrupt themselves or suffer harm in service of maintaining what they believe is the correct moral hierarchy. And there's also a willingness to commit crimes and attack their fellow Americans. I mean, they very easily in that scene, it was a life-threatening situation, and those 2 could have been seriously injured or killed. So just as we saw Heather Heyer get killed in Charlottesville, or other people who've been run down, by cars or whatever, it was a deadly situation. And it also included, these people are in council meetings and they're talking about losing their entire staff of police, firefighters, and trash pickup rather than accepting this court order to build the public housing. And the whole thing it's shocking and staggering. Remember the guy who was out there with his toothbrush? He's like, I'm ready to go to jail. I always have my toothbrush with me.
Yeah.
That's the level this is at, is these guys are they're willing to literally martyr themselves to protect this hierarchy. And I want to bring up one more thing real quick, and this is a little tangential, and that's just that there was a plot point in there where the Catholic Church had initially offered a site for housing.
Yes.
Yeah.
But they withdrew it because suddenly they're passing the collection plate. Nobody's giving them money. So they're being blackmailed by the white population to also participate in holding the line against equality.
Wow. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that little piece, Sean. That is really, really interesting. And look, I think one of the things that jumps into my mind in terms of, yes, I do think this reflects really well what we're living through right now. And, Spallone, that's his name, right? Spallone. He gets into office and almost immediately says, "Oh, sorry, I can't do that." Right? His whole thing was like, "I'm going to fight for you all, no matter what." And then, almost immediately, literally, I think in his acceptance speech, right, he's saying his victory speech. He's saying, "Sorry, I'm not going to be able to do it." And I think that's reflective of a couple things. There's always a politician who's prepared to go out there and tell the people exactly what they want to hear to get where they want to go, regardless of whether that is realistic or anything like that. And in this particular case, right, he he had to know. I mean, he was, maybe he is an idiot, but he knew what was on the other side of that election. But it's this short-sightedness, and that's what I want to hit on. This short-sightedness of like, only this next election matters. I'll deal with the rest when we get there. And there's nothing more GOP than that idea, right? Like, we'll just get into office, and then we will lie and cheat our way into staying in office, right? The show does a good job of showcasing what the politics is kind of behind the scenes, right? Where people are told whether or not they're going to run. Because you remember, he was going to run, but run for mayor again. But then he stepped back because for Democratic unity. You hear this a lot with they're like, oh, their Democrats had to run Hillary Clinton back in 2016, and that's why we lost it, right? So there's like this. What I'm trying to say is that there's this entire political machine in the background that is behind the screen that we all see, that we as voters see. And I thought that was really interesting how they got there, like the backroom deals, right? The phone calls, all that kind of stuff. And I thought that was really, really interesting. Wasicsko, right? He starts out with that naked, blind ambition, right? But ultimately he sort of comes around. And I bring that up because I think a lot of times we as politicians, and on the far left, we have this problem. We have this problem on the far left is that, right? Like, that we think that politicians have to be kind of like saints, right? Like they're either good people or they're bad people, right? So like Bernie Sanders is good because he's pure, right? He never takes money from anybody except for small donations, right? And this politician's evil because and then what it does is it overlooks the complexities First of all, I hope to one day run for office for something, and I can attest that people who want to run for office have big egos, are ambitious, and can be very self-absorbed and selfish. That is part of it, right? So that is the sort of person who is going to run for mayor. So you shouldn't be surprised when that person behaves that way when they are when they're in office, right? The idea is that like there has to be a balance between that ambition and statesmanship. And more than anything else, you want to sort of line up that person's ambition with whatever your policies are, right? But this idea that there's some sort of like, Jesus-like messianic figure out there that is just so great. Like, frankly, Obama is probably the closest you get to that, right? Someone who's like really genuinely a really good guy, right? And is really, really smart. But most politicians, like most people, including Obama, are very, very complicated people. And the idea that we overlook this, we expect everyone in our lives to be complex, to be unusual. Like my wife is a complex woman, right? Like I've gotten to know her. The more you get to know somebody, the more complex they get. That's how it's like with friends. But suddenly, when it's a politician, this person's supposed to be a saint, and supposed to be very like, almost like. And so I think that the show does a really good job of in the tradition of The Wire. Getting into the nitty gritty of individuals and the complexities of individuals and individual people. I thought that was really, really well done.
It's classic. It's classic David Simon. I mean, and he's. I was just remarking also on the excellent cinematography that he does. But before we move on, I just wanted to respond to some of that what you said, because I think it was really well said, Christoph.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
I think politics is like the opening to Game of Thrones, okay, is probably one of the best illustrations of the fact that the power is a machine. And not only does it grind people up, it's also independent of the personalities. And so you want policy. You need people to sort of be the front, but it's really this machine that's always going on in the background. And that's the machine that Republicans have managed to rig. And we're still sitting here playing like as if this is a fair game and not understanding that this is a machine. And the way that this might be getting ahead to the next two episodes, but the way that Wasicsko was sidelined, by that mayoral candidate who actually got in after Spallone, was just horrible, and led to the the ending of the show, which we will not spoil. But anyway, it's really, really something to try to keep your idealism intact when facing the realities of what happens to people who try to do good.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's something we'll get into more as we discuss the ending in our next installment. But Christoph, you made some really excellent points, and they definitely tie into my next point as well, which after that whole sequence of the housing plan getting passed and them fleeing with the lunatics breaking their windows and all that. In the subsequent weeks and months, we see our main character, Nick Wasicsko, fight and lose a brutal and disheartening re-election campaign against Spallone, who, as we discussed previously, is essentially the villain of the series and more or less embodies the kind of xenophobic craziness and opportunism that we saw take full root in 2016. Wasicsko clearly takes the loss very hard and understands that it was a consequence of his stance on the housing project, which of course is worsened by the fact that we've been seeing him trying to set up a new life for himself and his soon-to-be wife, house hunting and whatnot. So the juxtaposition clearly isn't lost on him when this happens. And so my question is, first of all, what do you guys think about this arc so far overall? And what do you think it says about what we're asking of people who run for office? Like, is it just the standard to be subjected to lunatics trying to smash your windows and curse you to death and want to hang you up on the gallows? Is that just the golden standard?
It wasn't always like this, and of course in local politics it's particularly brutal because you are interacting directly with with a small number of voters, and of course we know, especially locally, pandering to white fear and white rage is the easiest way to get elected in America. And that hasn't changed at all. If anything, it's gotten worse.
Definitely.
And if you look at what's going on right now, just within the last 6 months, the Republicans unleashed their critical race theory juggernaut. And now that is rippling out and playing out on, school board elections across the nation. Any jerk off, all they have to do to get elected is to come out against critical race theory. It's like a golden ticket, right? And they can automatically get elected in large parts of America. And anybody who won't come out against critical race theory, they're out. And so I have to quote Charles Murray here, even though I despise that creep. He said words to the effect that in a democracy, telling white people they are the problem and that they need to change is a recipe for electoral disaster. And he's not wrong. And if you notice how Spallone's behavior changes, you mentioned this earlier, Christoph, after he wins, when he says, I will abide by the court's decision. It's like, well, no shit, And it demonstrates that he was pandering the whole time and he knew exactly what was going on. It's just like a guy who's vaccinated and then spreading COVID disinformation, right? It's total hypocrisy. And that's what it unfortunately takes to get elected in America a lot of times.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have much to add, but I really do love the Wasicsko trajectory. He's selfish, right? He is ambitious. He certainly could treat his wife better. He is, and he just walks around cursing and talking to his dead dad. I mean, I think that, but I think that he is very relatable. I think, and I mean, when I think of what a politician is like behind the scenes, like this is kind of what I see. Like this kind of complex person who can put on a really nice face, who does care about the job, but mostly cares about winning. But it's a combination of all those things. I think the complexity is what really important. Another last point I wanted to bring up too, is I thought was fascinating, was how, local politics is a little bit is different for sure, but that they had friends who were Republicans, right? They had this one guy, they go to the bar, him and the mom from Stranger Things, right? They go to the Winona Ryder. They go to the bar and they have this one Republican guy with them and they're talking to it. And just like this idea that a Republican and Democrats could be genuine friends like that. I mean, they were like a little antagonistic or whatever, but I find that to be really interesting. And just, I can't imagine that that's happening right now in the House of Representatives. I mean, I guess they probably see each other in the gym or in the cafeteria, but I don't think they're huddling up and going and drinking beers and like poking fun at each other about winning a race or losing a race. Like, I just don't think that's where we are. And what's happened is that people like Spallone, people like Trump have weaponized one of the most fundamental human parts of being a human being, which is tribalism, right? They have weaponized that. They've purposefully whipped it up. And they don't care about the consequences, right? They don't care about what happens on the back end. And this goes to my point earlier, that as long as they get in office, they'll worry about the rest later. And if that means feeding the base red meat, it's gotten to the point where they can't even feed in real politics, they can't even feed the meat isn't bloody enough for them anymore, right? They had to keep upping the ante till we got to Trump. Remember when Palin seemed like, oh my God, there's red meat, right? There was a time when George W. Bush's talking about Christianity seemed like, oh my God, that's really pretty extreme. You know, he's an evangelical or whatever. And now look at what we're talking about. We're talking about theocrats, right? We're talking about all of them are just theocrats. That is now the baseline to get in. You have to be a fucking theocrat. So you know, the way this reflects, I think that this show and like this microcosm of this little of Yonkers, New York, really is so reflective of our politics over the last at least 10 years. But I'm thinking more like since the George W. Bush era.
Yeah, I agree. So in these episodes 3 and 4, we also meet and spend a lot of time with Billie Rowan, a young African-American girl growing up in the projects. Now, I found this character to be one of the more complicated and compelling in the whole series. She is definitely flawed and makes mistakes, but I think many of the mistakes she makes are pretty commonplace for young girls in similar circumstances, such as getting involved with the wrong guy, which her boyfriend is clearly a shitbag. She's definitely arrogant at times, and she definitely shows her youth and definitely makes some bad choices, but she's also very human and relatable in many ways. What do you guys think of this character, and what do you think Simon and the filmmakers are telling us by focusing so much on her story specifically?
This is a great question, and thanks for that setup. Also, I think that she is absolutely a really great character, and a couple of things that I thought a lot about her. Every time she makes one of these bonehead mistakes, starting from the very beginning, not listening to her mom, right? And her mom looks like a woman, and look, black women are tough, right? I mean, to be a black woman in America. Being a woman in America is tough. Being a black person in America is tough. Being a black woman who is poor in America is all. I mean, throw in LGBT, I guess, right? And then maybe and she's hard as nails, and she's trying to tell her daughter the ways of the world, right? Like it's tough out there. You don't finish high school, your life is going to be really, really hard. But then she continues to make these bonehead mistakes. She gets pregnant again, right? You're just like, Jesus fucking Christ. But, you know, a couple of things that pop into my head is, first of all, just the environment in which they live. I just want to, before I forget about this, I want to throw it in there. And that is, right, these project buildings were designed as prisons. I mean, they look like prisons. They are set up like prisons. They have that. I mean, that is how prisons are set up. And there was a project building here in Newark. I live in New Jersey. So in Newark, they've knocked down those project buildings a long time ago, thank God. And they do this townhouse thing now, incidentally. But because it's a much better system. But this was actually built by a prison, but by people who design prisons. Like literally, I'm not even asking that particular project building. So it's built to metaphorically sort of physically keep people in, but also metaphorically, right? Because there's this world that you live in when you're in the projects. And if you grew up your entire life in those projects, the odds of getting out of it are just so fucking slim. I mean, there are so many things that can go wrong in your life. Even if everything goes right in your life in that environment, the odds are still really, really high against you, you know? I think what was really interesting about her character, particularly though, was this, what came to mind is that she was making mistakes that people of her age make, right? And Black people, this happens to Black people and poor people, whether they be Black or not, all the time. And that is right? So for me, when I was a kid, I knocked over a mailbox, right? You know what happened to me that night? I got in trouble and the cops brought me home, and that was it. If I am in the projects, I'm now in jail. Right. And I am being roughed up by police officers. Right. So my point is that the same sort of little juvenile mistakes bad behavior and even really bad behavior, like really bad things that kids do sometimes, right? The consequences when you are in that sort of in the environment like that Billie grows up in are so stark. They're so life-changing, right? In this over-police sort of environment. And I think that's really important because that's how these young people get into the prison, cradle to prison pipeline really, really fucking early. I think it's really interesting too, is like as the show goes on, it's like, and I picked up on this a couple times, is that there are a lot of Black people, and she was talking to her friend, Billie was talking to one of her friends, and there's a lot of Black people who are just not interested in like being civil rights martyrs. Right? They don't want to go to the other side of town and be spit on. They don't want to go live in a neighborhood that they don't know. They just want to live their lives like everyone else. And I think we oftentimes get in many, many different ways. We think of this group of these sorts of Black people, right? And by sorts, I mean people who are not like suburban, like Black people like me, but sort of those like sort of the quintessential urban sort of hood Black person, right? Like we have these ideas of who they are, the criminals, and that they should want to like pull themselves out of the situation. But I think that like one of the things I really like about this show is that, again, I keep going back to this complexity of talking about these people as individuals, as people with a varying degree. Some people are really into moving into civil rights. Some people just don't give a shit. They just want to go and they just want to live their life quietly. So I thought that was a lot of interesting things. So I think Billie really is a great sort of, I keep saying microcosm, but a really great example of that complexity. And I'll come back to it after we hear Sean talk.
Sure.
Well, I have very little to add to that because I think you covered it so well. And I also have zero. There's nothing in my experience that relates to a Black female teenager. I mean, being a teenager is hard. Okay, it's bad enough if you're white. I can't imagine the gauntlet that a girl like that has to run in life. And, you saw the other woman who was, she was trying to get drugs and, she got propositioned. And it's just every day.
Doreen.
It's every day, it's drugs, sex, and violence. It's just, I can't imagine that. And so respect to anybody who makes it through. And I also want to say that this is a great illustration by Simon of why safe legal abortion is so important.
Oh my God.
Because her biggest mistake was keeping the kid with that fucking criminal,
Definitely.
And having more with him. I mean, it's horrible, right? So like if anybody's ever going to get out of those circumstances, they cannot fall pregnant at 15.
Definitely not. One thing I wanted to add to is, I can't remember his name, but the Black guy kind of like he is running the group.
Oh, yes. I know who he is. Yeah.
And he goes to have tea with one of the characters. Anyway, the point is that he, and also you remember the woman who is the blind woman's friend, or the woman who's going blind, and her friend, and she like visits her she like comes and she brings the blue paper that has the application for
nudging her to improve her situation. Yeah, and she's a little resistant.
Exactly. So both of those characters, the reason why I bring those characters up is because I really caught there from them implicitly. They didn't say it explicitly, but they talked about the importance of not frightening white folks, right? He goes to this woman's house and he is, over polite. Right. He cleans the crumbs meticulously off the table. Right. He wipes his feet multiple times before he comes in. And then once he gets in the door, she lets him in the door. He doesn't proceed into the house until she lets him in. Right. This other woman, and she does the same thing. The woman I'm talking about, she goes up to the car door, to like they're marching down the street, and she goes up to the white woman's car, and she's like, "Hi," and she puts her hand in, and it's very, very pleasant. Yeah, and so very neighborly. And I say this because as a person of color, as a Black person, especially as a Black man, I can tell you that is something that I think about all the time. Right? Is making sure that I am not frightening this white woman so that she ends up calling the cops, right? That I am putting on my, especially, dude, when I go out there on motorcycling, especially because all the best motorcycling takes place in the sticks, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I go into a gas station to pick up. I'm really big into beef jerky and corn nuts when I'm on a motorcycle trip. For all of you out there, I don't know if they're going to sell those in South Africa. I'm sure they'll have some sort of jerky. Corn nuts, I don't know, but we'll see. But my point is that, like, they go. I go into this store and I'm like, hey there, how you doing? Big old smile. Don't worry, I'm not a dangerous black person. Mm-hmm. and that is the experience of being a black person in a white environment. And I saw this happening in this show with these two characters in particular. And I thought that was very, very well done, very, very poignant. And I'm glad that that I don't know who Simon has advising him, but he really got some of those nuances, those nuances. He nailed those nuances very well.
You have to nail them, because if you don't, right, then the series itself becomes another form of colonialism, right? You're going into this, you're telling a black story in a white way, and you're not actually getting the details right. So, he dotted his I's and crossed his T's as far as that goes. Yeah. He's really good.
I think that's one of the things that draws me into his projects, is that it's truthful storytelling. He's very truthful. About all of these subjects, whether it's the Iraq invasion or a character like Billie Rowan trying to get by, like, it's all told very truthfully. Mm-hmm. But so in these 2 episodes, we also begin to see the evolution of another fantastic character in this series, Mary Dorman. And initially, she is very much against the housing, one of the most vocal opponents. And still is on the onset of episode 3, but the cracks in the foundations of her beliefs really start to show here, particularly in the moment we were discussing earlier when Spallone wins the mayoral race and suggests the city will abide by the judge's ruling on housing. You can see the gears starting to turn, and she begins to question what makes him any different from Wasicsko, and starts to understand Spallone's hypocrisy, as well as the fact that the housing will be built. So we touched on this a little bit in our previous installment, but what do you guys think is the key in today's world to more transformative change in the individuals perpetuating this type of xenophobic segregationist attitude and igniting the sorts of change in them that we see in Mary Dorman? Is this just a prime directive sort of situation where we can't force it and the pain is part of society's growth? Or I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I'd have to say that people like to change their minds slowly and in private. And in some of these cases, we're asking people to take public stands. And I think her character arc, we talked about this on the last show as well, but I think her character arc was really good because in the beginning, she's saying all that crap, all that evasive lying crap, like it's not racism, it's an economic issue. People are worried about their property values. She's talking about black people instead of calling them some slur. She says, oh, they're people of a different lifestyle, as if poverty and, being warehoused in a project is a lifestyle choice.
They're not like us. They're not like us.
Right. And so she's going full Trumper, full Trumper Karen, we trusted you. And now there's 200 townhouses going in, who knows how many in each house, she's just going on and on about with all this stuff. And I can't believe this is happening in Yonkers, and so the beginning, though, of her turn is human contact. And that is when one of the marchers in the neighborhood introduces herself, just comes over to the car, reaches in, shakes her hand. She cannot help but relate to her as a human being. And that starts the whole chain of events, which later in the final episodes plays out. But we see another turn where she has to, because this is what goes on in families all over the country. She has to really confront her own husband, who is still like the most rabid opponent, right? And they're all marching, but like the houses are in place, the construction equipment is rolling, fences are up, it's in full swing, and these guys are still marching. And she goes like, what are we trying to accomplish here? She realizes it's a dead end cause. And so it's that two-pronged thing, right? Once you realize that there's a new order, you're forced to come to terms with it and accept it because you can't stay that angry, right? Mm-hmm. but the thing that gets you there is human contact, direct one-to-one human contact. And that's what I think that the right is really trying to prevent. Frankly, that's what segregation was about, was preventing white people from who were not insane xenophobes, right, and racists, preventing them from actually just getting to know and becoming friends with, because that's the scariest thing to white supremacists.
Yes.
Are white people who accept and love black people.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point, Sean. Really, really great points. I don't have too much to add. I mean, like, because as you were talking and I was thinking about how I wanted to respond to this, and the human contact is the whole fucking thing, right? Because, right, we are, and I touched on this earlier, but like, we're human beings, and one of our most base sort of instincts is that tribalism, right? So we automatically sort people, things, ideas into us versus us, things that we identify with and things that we do not identify with. And once something goes into the them category, it is, I mean, literally not human anymore, right? That's how our brains that is sort of it is beyond the realm of sympathy, of empathy, right? And that's a very natural human thing. I think we have to fight that. I think it's different from different people, but what the separation does, and you alluded to this, Sean, with the segregation, and frankly, putting black people in a project prison, on the other side of town, does the same thing. Once they're over there, they're not human beings. They're not taking care of themselves. They're animals. Who cares about what happens to them? And if they come here, I'm going to defend this with my life. That's, by the way, why I need a gun, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
that's why you need a gun. Exact, otherized, right? That's why we need a gun. So I think there is that element. I think the other thing too, and so like, if people can get in touch with people, and actually see them as human beings, and that is what the character that I was talking about, the black guy that I was talking about, this is what he was trying to orchestrate, right? They went to these people's houses in the projects, right? And they saw that everyone wasn't living in a flop house, that there were families there, that they had tea kettles and teapots, and it's like, oh my God. These are and it's funny because she was giving tea, and I'm sure they did that on purpose, but she did tea for that same black guy on her side. It was literally the same thing in reverse, right? And you can't, unless you really are a dyed-in-the-wool racist, even if you really are so committed to that, if you are if you are one of those people who is mostly, their xenophobia is based mostly on ignorance, right? Once you break through that ignorance, there's a hope. And I think the last thing, and I want to branch it, is that, and I noticed this with her character as well, is that when the racism gets absolutely explicit, right? Because it's an economic issue, but there was a couple times when the person said, where the person she was talking to, I think one woman said and we're white, or she said something along those lines. But the bottom line is, and then they went and someone spray painted the N-word onto one of the buildings. So that kind of stuff shatters the illusion that white folks have that it's an economic issue. This has nothing to do with race, right? And anybody who's being even moderately honest with themselves then has to confront that. And most people won't. Most people will double down. But there's going to be some people like this woman or more remarkable person who might see something different.
Let's just say it always comes out. They're racists always, they can't hide it.
That's
it
true.
always leaks out no matter what happens, no matter how much they try to euphemize or distance themselves from that sort of language, it always comes out.
So true.
So, we definitely see a darker side to a few of these characters in these episodes. We see Billie's continued involvement with her obviously criminal boyfriend.
That guy's a schmuck.
He's such a schmuck. We see Doreen's substance abuse begin to spiral out of control with her concerned father, played by Michael Potts from The Wire. And let me just say, Simon he's one of those showrunners who will use a lot of the same actors throughout various projects and different roles. I believe the character you were referring to, Christoph, Mayhawk. Yeah, that's Clark Peters, Lester from The Wire, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah, that's who we were talking about with the quote.
Of course. I knew that guy. I knew that guy. I totally forgot that. Holy shit.
Yeah, that's who said the Michael K. Williams quote earlier. Yeah.
Okay, now it's all coming together, Drew.
All coming
together.
But yeah, so Doreen's concerned father, we see him kind of come into the apartment and check things out, right? So of all of the actors who get reused from The Wire as far as like differences in what type of character they're playing, Michael Potts, I think, has the most drastic, because he played Brother Mouzone on The Wire.
That's right.
Who was like a ruthless hitman. And so to see him here, concerned about his daughter's substance abuse problem is just such a contrast. It just, it catches my attention every time. I'm like, hey, that's Brother Mouzone, man. The illusion doesn't get shattered for me, really, but it's just something I notice.
Right.
But anyway, so I think we're all on the same page here as far as, these types of humanistic flaws that I'm talking about. But, what would you guys say to someone pointing at these sorts of things? Billie's boyfriend's criminality that she's bringing into it, and Doreen's substance abuse. What would you say to someone pointing at these sorts of things as validations of the concerns of the outraged mob?
Fuck you.
Yeah.
No, I'm just joking. No, but
I was playing devil's advocate.
Yeah, no, I'm just joking. I'm just joking, totally. In all seriousness, though, so when I think about this, right, is this deserving versus non-deserving poor sort of thing that we get from the right is bullshit. But let's start with the fact that when you take a human animal and place that human animal for generations under various circumstances, oppression, right? An oppression that is beyond oppression. I mean, this, like, Black people in America have been oppressed. I mean, the only thing that comes close really is the Native Americans, right? The Native Americans, that level of oppression, that level of real hatred for who those people are, where they've tried to mold and alter these people from their names to their to literally breeding them, right? And to create a certain type of person. So that level of and then of course all of the segregation and the Jim Crow, the default and de facto, the de jure and de facto discrimination that exists still today. All the reasons why Black people have higher crime rates, lower marriage rates, all these sort of statistics, right? Like, there are reasons for this. If you put any group of individuals into that exact same environment, in those exact same scenarios, this is where you will end. This is where you will end. But look, even if none of that were the case, even if we could really point to these folks and say, you are morally culpable for where you are in your situation, it still doesn't fucking matter. We don't condition decent treatment. We don't condition human rights and full access to society. We don't condition people's chance to succeed. We don't condition that on whether or not they're good people or bad people. That is beside the fucking point, right? Whether they really is beside the point, because, and this is an analogy I make with, to make an analogy is undocumented immigrants. A lot of people say, like, right, you see these Haitian guys getting whipped by the horses, by the border agents, all the horrible things that happen where they go out in the desert and dump out the water for these people, right? The people so like knowing that they're probably costing somebody their life in doing that, right? And a conservative shrugged his shoulders and said, "Oh, he shouldn't have broken the law. Right. He's a criminal." As if that is just like, okay, so just because this person crosses this literally an imaginary border, it's made up. It doesn't really exist, right? It only exists because we say it exists for the same reason money exists. We say it does, right? And it's like, so
all bets are off now.
All bets are off now. Now you can be able to, you can shoot them. They are just not human beings anymore. And this goes back to my tribalism thing, which I keep hitting on today. Is this idea of like once they've, like, conservatives will find any line in the sand to draw and then push somebody over that line and say, now you're an other and you deserve nothing.
Yeah. Well, it's really important to remember that even in the worst prisons, they still feed you and give you water, right?
Yes.
I mean, so
exactly.
The worst, you could be a murderer and you don't get treated like that, right? So it's insane. And look, I have to say that one of the hardest things for me to watch, and there's a lot of bad things in this series, okay? But one of the hardest things for me to watch, one of the most deplorable scenes, was seeing those fucking assholes in that station wagon with a camera, like fucking vulture disaster tourists, taking photos of the projects, documenting all the squalor that they were claiming was on its way into these lily white neighborhoods. It made me sick. It was seeing these people and it was really well recreated. Okay. I mean, I know these are all actors, but it was really well recreated, and seeing the portrayal of these people living their lives the best they could, being looked at as like some sort of zoo animals by Spallone and his cronies, and then taking these spy shots, right. And then blowing them up and just plastering them out and saying, oh, look at these horrible animals. It's just sick and disgusting victim blaming. I don't have anything more. It was very well portrayed.
Yeah, pretty much all of the scenes with Spallone make me feel dirty, angry, or both.
Totally.
So I agree completely. Conversely, though, one of the things I really enjoyed in these two episodes was the ending montage of episode 4. It was very much in keeping with how Seasons of The Wire ended, if you remember, with a well-crafted montage showing where the characters are and where they're going. In The Wire, they were always very climactic and final feeling because they never knew if they were getting renewed for another season. So they treated every season finale as if it was going to be the season or the series finale. Right.
I didn't realize that. Huh?
Oh, yeah, for sure. That's why all of those finales feel so complete. They really wrap up every thread each time. But I was reminded of that in this episode 4 montage at the end. And for the most part, this one is relatively hopeful at this point in the story. We see Nick and Nay get married. Carmen and Billy are having dinners with their kids. Norma is knitting peacefully. Doreen is finally making the call to her folks, finally asking for help. We see the housing being built. And we see the construction workers talking about how quickly they'll get everything up. But up until we get to the very end, in which, as you mentioned, Christoph, we see the housing defaced with death threats and racial slurs. So to me, this sequence almost encapsulates the American experience in a way, a contrast of the peaceful moments with the racism and hate bubbling under the surface. So what did you guys think of this sequence and how this pair of episodes ended overall?
I thought it was as well done as any of those. I'm not a huge fan of these end of episode or end of season music montages. I really think that I mean, some people like them. I think maybe it's music video culture. I don't know why it is that everybody uses these things now. It's like when you hear the music start at the end of the episode, near the end, okay, the show's wrapping up, and they're going to, they're going to tie up all these loose ends. I don't like it. I wish they would just end the episode, with a narrative. And but I think it was well done. And I think what you said is exactly right. And I think that the contrast between, Nick and his wife to be getting their new home and versus, the other problems, it was like you said, it's a spectrum of the experience.
Yeah. I like the montages. I mean, I think that it wasn't until these last couple episodes that it really clicked in my mind. I was like, holy shit, this really does feel like The Wire in so many ways. Yeah. And I mean that in all good ways, really. Yeah. I thought that was really cool. I thought but what I will say, it's kind of relatedly, is one of my favorite parts was, did we get there already? Oh, I don't want to say it if we didn't get there already. So, I mean, bottom line is, let me just leave it this. I'll leave it at this. And that is Wasicsko's character arc at this point in the show, 4 episodes in, I really like the guy that he has become, and at the end of those episodes and in those montages, et cetera, you really feel that. And in general, you really feel like it was just a really great way of wrapping up how these characters have evolved. And so I liked it. I think your point's well taken, Sean. But that said, I really did like it.
It's personal preference.
Yeah,
for sure.
It was well done, you know.
This is not life or death. This is not a life or death.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's all subjective, guys. It's all subjective.
Right. Like so science, right? Science is just all, just subjective, whatever.
COVID, subjective.
Right. Yeah. Whatever, it's fine. Just whatever you feel. It's about your truth. It's about your truth.
Exactly. Nailed
I deserve that.
I wasn't even pointed at you. I'm just fucking around.
Not even. Yeah. just being absurd. All right. So guys, any closing thoughts or observations you want to close us out with? Adi?
Just that. Thanks, Drew, for bringing this show to my attention. I didn't know about it until you told me about it, and I've really, really enjoyed it. My wife and I have really, really enjoyed it. So everybody should go out and watch it. Although if you got to this point in the episode, presumably you have watched it. But I hope so. But I hope so. But anyway, but thanks, Drew. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Yeah, I concur. I think that it's not a show that I knew about, and so I was really happy when you selected that for our topic.
Awesome, guys. Awesome. I'm glad you guys have enjoyed it and gotten something out of it. We've still got 2 more episodes to go to get through. It's going to be great. We've talked a lot about David Simon, but there's another creative contributor to this series that I want to spend some time talking about next time, which is the director, Paul Haggis, who, as I'm sure many of our listeners may know that name, as he has been very outspoken against the Church of Scientology as a former member, which, his speaking out against that organization cost him a lot initially. So I think, that ties in a lot to some of the sacrifices that Nick Wasicsko has to make in doing the right thing. So we're going to get into some of those correlations, as well as the ending of the series, which is incredibly powerful. But that's it for now. That's our show for today. As I said, we'll be doing follow-up installment to cover the last 2 episodes. Just be sure to subscribe and follow us on YouTube and social media to stay updated on our future content. If you like the show, be sure to hit the like button on YouTube, leave a comment, leave a review. All that stuff helps us. But most of all, word of mouth helps us more than anything else. Tell your friends about the show. We'd really appreciate it. All your support means a lot. New episodes post Mondays at noon Eastern on YouTube, all the major podcast channels. We also publish new articles weekly in our journal at theradicalsecular.com. I'm Drew Scott. Thank you for being here. And remember, wherever you are, you too can be radically secular.
The Radical Secular podcast is written and produced by Christoph Defoe, Sean Prophet, Joe Okipinti, and Drew Scott. Artwork and design by Tim Stetner. Post-production and theme music by Sean Prophet. Special thanks to our support team, Lindsay Brightman, Jillian Sky Jacobs, and Lori Field Okipinti.